All right. Good evening. Welcome everyone to this evening's program, Coming Together to Improve the Diversity of Clinical Trials Research. This event is made possible by the Dan McMenamin Endowment and in partnership with the Weill Cornell Medicine Meyer Cancer Center of Community Outreach and Engagement. The Dan McMenamin Endowment is dedicated to the life and legacy of a Weill Cornell graduate, Dr. Daniel T. McMenamin. The endowment seeks to improve care, coordination, and collaboration for patients by increasing awareness, improving access, and fostering cooperation among patients, physicians, and researchers. We want to thank the family and friends of Dr. McMenamin for their support and contribution to this program. My name is Kelly Jack, and I'm the program manager for the Meyer Cancer Center Office of Community Outreach and Engagement. I am pleased to be joined this evening by our keynote speaker, Dr. Gina Villani, additional panelists, Diane Nathaniel and Danielle Hayden, and moderator, Dr. Nkusi Golden. We will begin this evening with a presentation from Dr. Villani, followed by a panel discussion and Q&A session. If you have any questions throughout the program or during the panel discussion, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom window. Tonight's session will be recorded and made available for later viewing. In alignment with the Daniel McMenamin Endowment mission, the event strives to foster cooperation among patients, physicians, and researchers by educating patients on the complexities of collaborative care and offering resources to guide the patient in making informed decisions about their care. We hope you all find tonight's program enhances your knowledge on clinical trials and improves patient-centered care delivery. However, before we begin, we're going to launch a brief poll to assess your knowledge on clinical trials. No pressure here. So it's going to come up on your screen if you can just answer a couple of questions for us. Okay, we're just waiting to get a few more responses in. All right, we're going to close the poll shortly. Okay, wonderful. So thank you all for completing the poll. Okay, let's jump into our keynote presentation by Dr. Gina Villani. Dr. Villani attained her medical degree at the State University of New York, Stony Brook. She received her training in hematology and oncology at New York University, NYU, and her master's in health at Columbia University. Dr. Villani's area of interest is in developing programs and services for underrepresented populations. She is passionate about ensuring equitable cancer care to those in need. Dr. Villani currently serves as the Chief of Medical Oncology at New York Presbyterian Queens. She is the proud recipient of Outstanding Women in Medicine Award from the American Cancer Society, as well as Outstanding Community Physician from the Prevent Cancer Foundation. She has been a member of the American Society of Clinical Oncology, also known as ASCO, since 1997, where she has served as the chairman of the Health Disparities Committee. She is a member of the ASCO Educational Committee and is an ASCO Education Scholar. Thank you, Dr. Villani, for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and I am going to share my slides. Okay, can everyone hear me? Thank you so much for inviting me to this really, really important talk, and thank you all for attending tonight. So we're going to be talking about clinical trials, and I think it's a very, very timely topic given what we've been through in the past year and a half. So when you hear the word clinical trials, what comes to mind? Do you think of the words experimentation, guinea pig, fear, anxiety, misunderstanding, exploitation? Or are you in that camp that thinks hope, innovation, discovery, participation, benefit, and breakthroughs? I want you all to think about that, which camp you do belong in. As we go through the lecture today, we're going to just touch on, well, what is actually a clinical trial? What are clinical trials? Why is diversity in clinical trials so important? And ultimately, how can we improve on the current situation and make clinical trials more inclusive? So what is a clinical trial? Well, a clinical trial is something that actually seeks to answer a question. These are research studies that are performed in people with the aim at evaluating either a medical, surgical, or behavioral intervention. And it's really the primary way that we as physicians and scientists have to find out if a treatment is safe and effective. As I said, this is a very timely topic because I think that the COVID pandemic really provides a good example of clinical trials and the benefit that they can bring to the individual and to society. So when we think about COVID, we had a problem that needed to be addressed. We had a couple of problems that need to be addressed. First, we needed to have effective treatment for patients who developed COVID, and we also needed a way to prevent people without COVID from getting the disease. The problem with using treatments that have not undergone rigorous clinical trials is, as we've seen again over the past year and a half, that these medications can have toxicities and not even be effective. And we all, I think, are familiar with drugs like hydrochloroquine and ivermectin that have been touted as being drugs that are effective in treating COVID and yet never underwent rigorous clinical trials. These drugs are not without toxicity. Ivermectin can cause cardiac toxicity and brain damage. And again, just giving people treatments without rigorous clinical trials gives us no way to judge effectiveness. So clinical trials, and we're going to be really talking tonight about drug trials. There are other types of clinical trials looking at psychosocial interventions, et cetera. We're going to really be focusing primarily on drug trials. And drug trials are done in phases. The first phase of any clinical drug trial seeks to answer the question, what are the side effects of the drugs and what is the maximum tolerated dose of that drug? The outcome in a phase 1 clinical trial is really looking at toxicity. So a patient enrolls in a phase 1 trial. They may be someone who's gone through other treatments and has nothing standard available to them, and really, again, doesn't necessarily benefit from the trial because that trial is geared to just ask the question, what are the side effects and what is the correct dose of drug? In a phase 2 trial, the phase 2 seeks to answer the question, in what tumor types is the drug most effective? And the outcome of phase 2 clinical trials is the response. Does giving that drug shrink an ovarian tumor or a breast tumor? In phase 3 trials, the question that we seek to answer is the drug under study better than the standard of care? And the outcome in a phase 3 trial is disease-free and overall survival. So if we look at COVID clinical trials, this is just a graph of hospitalizations based on age in unvaccinated or partially vaccinated patients versus unvaccinated patients. And I would say that this is a positive clinical trial, that we can see that hospitalization was dramatically increased in the unvaccinated compared to vaccinated. And so again, we've seen over the past year and a half that by having these clinical trials for COVID, by getting people to participate in these trials, that we have been able to develop effective treatments for patients who do have COVID, like remdesivir, monoclonal antibodies, and steroids. And we've been able to develop vaccines that can prevent the uninfected from having serious illness and hospitalization. So I do believe that the past year and a half, although, again, we're going to talk about diversity, and I think these were very diverse trials, but COVID has shown us that clinical trials can really lead to some dramatic outcomes for patients. So if you think about the past year and a half and where we've come with COVID, especially in New York, where do you fall when you think again about clinical trials? Do you fall in that group that says, no, I still think they're experimentation? Or does our past experience in the past year give you hope about clinical trials and again, the impact that they can have on the health of the individual as well as the community? I hope that what has transpired has swayed most people to that right-hand list and provides people with hope and the belief in innovation. So cancer is the second leading cause of death in the United States. Unfortunately, though, only 10% of all cancer patients actually participate in clinical trials. And when you think about, all of our standard cancer treatments have come from clinical trials. And over the past decade, there have been tremendous innovations in cancer care. I've been an oncologist for 30 years, and when I started my fellowship back at NYU, we really had very little treatments to give patients. And again, it's that participation in clinical trials that really has moved the needle in cancer care and led to so many innovations for cancers that in the past we could never dream of treating. So why is it that participation rates are so low among cancer patients? And I think the first thing that we all think about is distrust. And that the medical community really, focuses on the fact that people don't trust us. And there may be good reason that people don't trust us. I think that many of you are familiar with the Tuskegee syphilis in the Negro male trial that was conducted by the Public Health Service of the United States. And this trial ran from 1932 to 1972. And it was a trial looking at the natural history of untreated syphilis in Negro males. In 1943, penicillin became available for the treatment of syphilis. Unfortunately, the gentlemen that were participating in the study were never offered that treatment and went on to uncontrolled and untreated syphilis. It took until 1997 for President Clinton to issue a formal presidential apology for that study. And so that study really, we always talk about that study as being what caused that distrust among the community. I think the medical community, we need to open our eyes a little bit, because it wasn't just Tuskegee. There's been a long, long history of abuse, if I can say that, that has led to this really feeling of distrust among underserved populations. I gave a talk last week I gave grand rounds at our hospital last week, and I cited a book that's called Medical Apartheid, and I forgot the author of the book. But I read that book many years ago, and it's really a history of things that occurred in medicine that really helped to build this distrust among communities. And I think that it really should be required reading for all medical students, because it really gives you a sense of what transpired and why there are communities that do not trust the medical profession. But having said that, after Tuskegee, safeguards were put in place, such as informed consent, institutional review boards were created so that clinical trials had to go through these reviews before they would even be opened up at an institution. There were federal policies that were created for the protection of patients that participate in clinical trials, and there are national bioethic advisory committees that really keep an eye on the studies that are done in this country. So certainly distrust is a major factor in lack of participation, but there are many other barriers that cause lack of clinical trial participation, especially in cancer. And if you look at this graph, and this was given to me by my mentor over at Weill Cornell, one of the major reasons for lack of participation is the patient was never told that a clinical trial was an option. They weren't offered a clinical trial. The second reason was that patients weren't eligible for that trial. And then you see that patients were offered and declined, and a small portion of patients didn't have coverage for their care. So again, it's not just distrust that leads to this lack of participation. I want to just switch gears for a second and talk about diversity, because we not only need more cancer patients to participate in clinical trials, but we need a diverse population of patients to participate. And when we think about diversity, it is race and ethnicity, but it's also age, gender, patients with underlying medical conditions, socioeconomic status, educational background, language, and place of residency. All of these things add to the diversity of patients that we enroll on trials, and we have to make an effort to include not only people of different race and ethnicity, but people who do have underlying conditions, people who are poor, people who lack education, and certainly rural versus city patients. So why is diversity so important? Well, we're going to start with an example, and I'm going to keep coming back to this example. I just want to show you two women with breast cancer. The first one is an 80-year-old white female who has a history of heart disease and kidney disease. She's widowed, she lives alone, and she has difficulty with ambulating, but she has recently been diagnosed with breast cancer. The second patient, also diagnosed with breast cancer, is a 30-year-old African-American female. She has no other medical issues. She lives with her husband and 3 children, and she's fully functional and working. So I want you to remember, we're going to, again, harken back to those two examples. I think it's very important to understand that if we don't have diversity in our clinical trials, this actually creates disparities. And disparities in cancer are adverse outcomes between certain population groups in terms of measures such as incidence, morbidity, mortality, survivorship, and quality of life. This is just to give you a flavor of the disparities that exist in cancer, and there are so many. I could do an entire hour presentation on this, but this is just a slide looking at the incidence of prostate cancer in non-Hispanic Blacks. And you can see that the incidence of prostate cancer and the mortality in prostate cancer among Black men is much higher than among white men. This is a slide that shows you cancer mortality in poor versus affluent communities. So again, that diversity is not just race and ethnicity, but has to do with income level, education, language, so many different things. So back to our example, again, the 80-year-old female, history of other medical conditions, lives alone, difficulty ambulating, versus the 30-year-old African-American who has no other medical issues, both with a similar diagnosis of breast cancer. So in our 80-year-old, if she participates in a clinical trial, well, she does participate. And what we find when she participates in that clinical trial is that because she's a little older, the dose of the drug needs to be reduced for her. When that drug is approved, it's approved at a modified dose for elderly patients because she participated in that clinical trial and added to our knowledge of age as a diverse factor. If she doesn't participate, the drug may get approved, right? Maybe we don't have enough older patients on that trial, but the drug still gets approved without any information in regards to how do we dose that drug in an elderly patient. For a 30-year-old, if she participates and tolerates well and has an excellent response, she may be contributing to that drug becoming a first-line treatment over the standard of care. And in fact, by her participation, has gotten a treatment that has actually improved her outcome over the standard of care. If she doesn't participate, she's treated with the standard of care and may not have that benefit of having a superior treatment. So how do we get people to participate in clinical trials? Because as you see, not only does it add important information for the patients coming after them, but it may actually benefit that patient themselves on an individual level. Well, what do we do about that distrust? Well, first of all, I think that as a medical community, we really need to own that distrust. We need to understand it, and we need to know that it's more than just Tuskegee. It's our past, and it's actually our present. We have federal and state regulations that protect our patients, and we really need to improve our patient-physician relationship. Because if we have a good relationship with our patient, it's the first step in mitigating that distrust. And for the provider to understand that distrust, again, will only improve our patient-physician relationship. In terms of physicians not offering the drug, we need to be more aware. We need to increase our awareness among physicians that these clinical trials are open and that they are of the utmost benefit to the patients and to the cancer community. And we also need to have patients advocate on their own behalf, go to see their doctor, and when the doctor talks about a treatment plan, ask, yeah, but do you have a clinical trial open? Let's talk about that. So we really need to work on patient advocacy, and that's why you're all here tonight. In terms of patients not being eligible, this is a problem for clinical trials, that we tend to pick the most fit individuals, the best of the best to even participate in the clinical trials to begin with. And there is a movement to broaden that eligibility, to make sure that we include those patients who have other underlying medical conditions, other socioeconomic barriers, and really broaden that pool of patients who's even eligible to participate in the trial in the first place. And in terms of insurance and costs being a barrier, well, I would say that we need to really advocate and make sure that anyone who is insured, that their insurer covers all the costs of the clinical trial, including transportation, which is a huge barrier to obtaining care in general, and certainly care on a clinical trial. And I would also say that universal healthcare would certainly be of a benefit to all of us. So let's go back to that example, that 80-year-old female with a breast cancer. How do we enhance her participation in clinical trials? Well, again, as I said, we broaden the eligibility so that we're including real-world patients, patients who may have other underlying medical problems like kidney and heart disease. They need to be treated for their cancer. We need to understand how these drugs work in patients with underlying conditions. We provide her with transportation assistance. She's unable to ambulate. She lives by herself. This has got to be part of our clinical trials package. We arrange support services for her at home. This should be just part of good cancer care to begin with, but certainly if she's going to participate in a clinical trial, we want to make sure that she has some support at home because she lives alone. And we also provide her with emotional support because, again, she's battling cancer and she's doing it by herself. How do we enhance participation for that 30-year-old with breast cancer? Well, we ensure that she has a supportive doctor-patient relationship and that she's offered a trial in the first place. We engage her husband, her family, anyone who is with her in her care, and educate them about the treatment plan and the trial that she's about to participate. We assist her with childcare so that she's able to come to her appointments and able to stay on schedule. And we provide her also with emotional, occupational, and psychosocial support because she's a 30-year-old going through cancer. And we address, certainly with her, any long-term toxicities because the hope is that she'll be cured from her cancer and go on with her life. And we want to make sure that we address any issues that might affect her down the road. So again, I just want to get back to that slide about what comes to mind when you think about clinical trials. And again, I hope that we will do the work that's needed to swing the majority of patients, be it for COVID, for cancer, for any kind of medical condition, from that side where people feel that they're being experimented on or used as a guinea pig, to that side where they feel that they're participating in innovation and discovery, that they have hope for themselves and for their communities, and that they are helping to provide a benefit and a breakthrough, again, for themselves and their community. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Villani, for that wonderful presentation. I know I've learned a lot. I particularly appreciate your examples and just ways in which we can increase participation in clinical trials and tangible steps to take. So now I'm going to turn it over to our panelist and moderator. So I'm just going to introduce you all. And as I introduce you all, if you could just turn on your camera. So I'm going to first introduce our moderator, Dr. Nkusi Golden, who's a radiation oncologist at Weill Cornell Medicine, where he serves as the medical director of clinical research in the Stitch Department of Radiation Oncology, and has joined us recently as the assistant director of clinical trials facilitation in the Office of Community Outreach and Engagement within the Meyer Cancer Center. Dr. Golden's clinical research career has been dedicated to translational research as it pertains to gastrointestinal, lung, and hematologic malignancies. Particularly, he has studied the utilization of radiotherapy in the development of anti-tumor immunity. He has investigated the local and systemic effects of radiotherapy and has helped to develop strategies directed at harnessing anti-tumor immunity in patients with locally advanced and metastatic disease. His work has helped to establish radiation as a powerful partner to immunotherapy. Recently, Dr. Golden was selected for the inaugural, I want to say a whole bunch of acronyms, BMSF, NMF, AACR, sorry that I don't have that spelled out for everyone, Clinical Trials Career Development Program, congratulations, award, with a mandate to facilitate the enrollment of patients that better reflects the diversity of patients within the cancer center's catchment. Dr. Golden is looking forward to being part of a cohort of clinicians transforming the way clinical research is to be done in the most equitable way. Next, we have Diane Nathaniel. I know that Diane was double booked, so she may be joining us a little late, but she hails from Brooklyn, New York. She is a stage 3 colon cancer survivor. Today, she stands strong and has turned her experience into into an opportunity to help spread awareness in the importance of cancer screenings. After having cancer, she created and co-founded Beat Stage 3, an image-conscious campaign for cancer fighters and survivors. Diane spends much time as an advocate and volunteer with the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network as an ACT lead, an ambassador constituent team leader. She's responsible for the 8th Congressional District governed by Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. This role involves sharing information with the community about legislative policies that affect cancer fighters, survivors, and caregivers. Diane has represented her district in Albany and Washington, D.C., speaking before members of Congress about the importance of providing affordable, quality healthcare for patients to get screened. And she's a great person all around, so happy to have you here as well, Diane. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Danielle Hayden, who is a certified clinical research professional and has 14 years of cancer clinical research experience. She has extensive expertise in clinical trials administration, operations, finance, regulatory, strategic planning, and compliance. In her current role as Assistant Director of Network Clinical Trials, she provides oversight and operational support for the implementation of cancer clinical trials in the Weill Cornell Medicine New York Presbyterian Regional Hospital Network and New York Presbyterian Brooklyn Methodist Hospital and New York Presbyterian Queens. Thank you all so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Golden. And last but not least, just put your questions in the Q&A. I know we have some questions already, but you can continue to put them in the Q&A, please.
All right. So thank you very much, Kelly, for that introduction. And I'm, honored to be, uh, a part of this discussion and also have, the other panelists here as well. So I'm going to start off with a couple of questions until other questions come in from our Q&A participants. But I'm going to start off with some questions that were previously asked by those within the community that were interested in clinical trials. So I'm just going to throw out a couple of questions for the panelists, to ask. So one individual asked in regards to a clinical trial. So there's times where people are given a placebo. And for those that don't know what a placebo is, it essentially is, either you're receiving a drug that is being tested, or you're receiving a pill that likely could be a sugar pill, or if given through a IV, it could be like saline or a salt solution. So someone asked whether or not it's worthwhile being a part of a trial where the possibility of getting a placebo is there. So perhaps Dr. Villani, you can answer this question.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a cancer clinical trial that had a placebo. I think that if we're treating a patient with cancer, it really would be unethical to give them a placebo. So that's very, very uncommon in cancer clinical trials. It may occur in other types of trials, but I think we're, again, as we talked about, there's a lot of regulations, and we really couldn't do that, right? That would be almost like a Tuskegee if someone had a disease and we withheld treatment from them. So placebo is not a common situation in cancer clinical trials.
Okay, so we have a question from one of the members of the audience. It says, it seems a lot of the clinical trial burden is put on the patients who are likely overwhelmed and underinformed. What can be done to ensure doctors are better informed on which trials may have the best chance of success? So perhaps Danielle, since you have a lot of oversight about the clinical trial process, perhaps you can answer this question.
Sure. So as part of the Joint Clinical Trials Office, we have many resources available to patients and their families, but we also have resources available to physicians and faculty members as part of the hospital. And as a matter of fact, the JCTO website is very much available to all physicians that are treating patients. You can easily type in a diagnosis and see if there is a particular clinical trial that's available for that diagnosis. Of course, we do recommend that physician reach out to the research team to engage whether that study is appropriate for the patient that they're considering. There's also email notifications that we typically send out within the institution, reminding the physicians of open clinical trials that are available, and sort of making sure that, if studies open and close, they're kind of aware of what's available at that current moment. So those are some strategies that we currently utilize to ensure that the physicians are aware of what trials are available within the hospital. We are also exploring opportunities to share the information with physicians in our community. And we often have our physicians internally kind of discuss options and outreach with community physicians because they often have the relationships with either referring providers or community doctors. And this is typically done either through email or through personal letters. And it's really to announce sort of exciting and innovative clinical trials that are available. So there are a multitude of ways that information is disseminated. And we're always looking for additional ways to make sure that the information gets to the right people.
Okay, great. It looks like Diane Nathaniel has just joined us. And we're very happy to have her as well on the panel. As a patient advocate, Diane, can you sort of give a background in terms of your experience or lack thereof experience dealing with clinical trials?
Hi, good evening. Yes. So I am a stage 3 colon cancer survivor, and my cancer was treated by surgery to remove the cecum portion of my colon, my appendix, and 14 lymph nodes, of which 4 were cancerous, followed by port installation in my chest, 12 rounds of chemotherapy over a course of 8 months, 48 hours every 2 weeks at the age of 44. So it wasn't even, I wasn't of screening age at that time. That's 7 years ago. I was diagnosed 3/7/2014, right? You know, those dates like, like clockwork. I could remember like hearing the doctor waking me up from my colonoscopy telling me then. And I think during my process, I just happened to ask about clinical trials because another patient was actually in a trial. And I was just told I wasn't eligible. You're not eligible for the trial. This is the standard treatment. And that was the end of the conversation. There was no signage about clinical trials posted up anywhere saying that, you need to meet an eligibility requirement. Like I learned all of that information going back to school and getting a degree in public health. And that is how I found out all about clinical trials. It would have been helpful if my oncologist said, you don't meet these requirements because clinical trials are, based on specifics, right? You need to have not been sick, or maybe you need to be a Black man, not a Black woman. You need to be in stage 2, not stage 3. There was just like I learned about follow-up and all of that only being a student. And so I think about all the people who are eligible and the doctors don't mention it at all. To them, and they don't ask because why would you? We're only hearing about clinical trials in such great abundance recently, in the recent years. 7 years ago, this was not on television like this. This was not a discussion on Zoom like we're having right now. It was just information that people had to look for. It just wasn't as available as we're seeing it now. So I'm very grateful. I'm an advocate with American Cancer Society. And last year we lobbied the Henrietta Lacks bill, which is great, and of course Congress is all for it, which involves including, more people of color in these clinical trials and making it, legally binding that you can no longer exclude people and you cannot create barriers where that is like silent exclusivity. So I was blessed to go before Chuck Schumer in Congress and talk about, my story and all the other stories that no one has heard about, and just saying how it's easy to have people just pass away, give up, no hope when there might be some. So just how can we move forward in making sure that people are, held accountable and to a standard where you give people quality, affordable, accessible healthcare, and clinical trials being one of them. So I didn't get a chance to participate. My care was, it was said to me, it was a standard. So when you have this specific type of cancer that I had, this is the treatment for it. There was no immunotherapy, there was no pill, there was none of that. This was the standard care. And I believe I had oxyplatin, leucovorin, and 5-FU. And those were the 3 drugs that I had that we used to say in chemo, live to die. We're coming here, we're having all this putting in our systems, and it's literally killing all the good stuff that we have. But 7 years later, I'm healthier than I was then, and I'm med, like no evidence of disease, and praying that I stay healthy.
So that's very interesting. Your story, whereby you were not in that screening age for even looking for the cancer, and for colon cancer, we're starting to see that in younger patient populations, some individuals are getting diagnosed, in particular, like for colorectal cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And as a physician, in this field of oncology, we're starting to shift out of perhaps screening earlier and catching cancer at an earlier diagnosis. But within that same frame of mind, we are also custom tailoring clinical trials for younger patients, so that we can offer something that's better than the standard of care. As a field, as a oncologist or cancer physician, our minds are being open to developing these clinical trials for this particular situation where a clinical trial hasn't necessarily been available. So I believe that was great that you talked about your experience and not having access. And I believe that in the future, and near future at that, as a physician and being a part of this field, we're starting to be a lot more open-minded to target our trials to individuals that wouldn't necessarily have a clinical trial available to them.
Well, thank you for considering. Yes, thank you very much. Dr. Phillips actually mentioned some new breakthroughs with colon cancer. So I'm very excited to hear what will be coming forth, and part of my advocacy is not just saving myself, but others that will come, after me, and hopefully they'll have a better experience. So while I'm grateful for the research and what was present and available for me then and now, and it worked so far, I do wish that there was something that could have, cut that time in half. It was, yeah.
So Diane, if I may,
Yes.
we talked about, here we are educating the community, but at the same time, our community, the physician community, needs to be educated, right? And we had talked about, just thinking Tuskegee caused the distrust when there's a whole history. You mentioned Henrietta Lack and that whole controversy. And then a big reason that people don't participate, and this has been studied, 60% of people aren't even offered a clinical trial. So teach us, as a patient advocate, what would you say to us, the physician community and the medical community? Give us the ingredients of how we can do better.
I think you can see more patients in the community stepping out of your office than you ever will see waiting for your patients to walk through the door. And a part of what my organization does, Stage 3, is we host these CAPE events, like before COVID, but those events would bring doctors from all over, specifically gastroenterologists, or oncologists who are treating patients for colon or prostate cancer, any of the GI cancers, into a space with the community. I've hosted something for Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority and the Alphas. I've done the church, and I've done the regular, just community forums at the hospital. And I just think I had 7 or 8 doctors come out and speak before hundreds of people. You've reached at least 25, right? Because everyone's not going to come to your door, but most people want to have a relationship that doesn't involve you across the table from me, but there's more of a conversation and relationship being built around, why is this important? Why should I do this? Why should I be trusting? There's been, as we see with COVID, right? I feel like that has overshadowed all of the other illnesses we are plagued with, and people are not going to the doctor even more now. And it's about messaging, how are we speaking to people? Are we considering their environment, what things they have control over and what things they don't? Not shaming folks for being sick in the first place. Some things they can't even help. I was a student at Downstate doing my public health degree, and we had to canvass the neighborhood. And we had to literally write down in that neighborhood what things caused poor health outcomes for this community that were not in their control. And we were all crying at the end of it because we live in Brooklyn, right? And then when you go through Flatbush, across from the hospital, the very hospital that serves a Afro-American, African, Caribbean community, there's nothing but fast food right across the streets from the hospital. As we walked down the street, there were like 4 abandoned buildings that had started new construction, but never finished it. No trash can receptacles, no place for physical activity, a food desert, no place to get for a supermarket. Where are kids playing? No healthcare facilities in terms of like clinics. So we think holistically around why people are sick and having to see you in the first place. We need to start at that level, about what's in their environment and that's accessible. And why would they trust anything or body that has them live like that? Those living conditions are subpar. And I think also, Black people, we don't talk about medical history. We don't talk about health issues. Cancer has always been this taboo type of illness, which is, or an old people disease. So it's very difficult to have conversations with older people about cancer. But I do think this younger generation is definitely open, especially if they know it relates to diet. More people have been so much more interested in their diet, right? More vegans, more plant-based folks, more vegetarians. People are moving away from meat products and dairy products. And the economy is figuring it out, right? They're like, oh yeah, we'll get some oat milk, some cashew milk, some almond milk. They're seeing people are doing almond butter. They're making it happen. You got different cheeses to choose from. They see that there's a market for it. So I just feel like the conversation it can't be your standard come into my office. It has to be innovative. As we are doing the Zoom call right now, right? This is innovative. This wasn't happening before COVID. We weren't doing roundtables about this. It was more meetings about our stuff, right? But now that we're educating people through Zoom, imagine how many lives you could save when we get hopefully back to some way you can come into the community and host something. Brooklyn is very event driven. We like parties, we like drinks, we like food, we like socializing. So I think, and folks want to feel like you're their doctor. Just know all the trust they put into you. I know and I know that that's heavy for you as a doctor, right? Saving a life or losing a life. So I really think cultural responsiveness is going to be key. You got to know the population that you serve, and you have to respect the population that you serve. And that's not saying you're disrespecting them, but sometimes when you're focused on your clinical, and I see why you guys are so disassociated. After getting my public health degree, they were sick of me with my mental health and my fuzzy, warm attitude, right? When you're talking numbers and when you're talking diagnosis, and these things have to be on point and right, you don't have time to be warm and fuzzy. I get it. But if you're culturally responsive, then you'll understand why somebody says, I'd rather pray about it than go get this medicine. Or, in my religion, we don't do blood transfusions. Like that stuff is really, really important in how you get people to participate in these clinical trials. And that's from us having to do a survey and collecting that information.
Yeah, that's great information. You had mentioned about, there wasn't any signage or anything that, led you to believe that a clinical trial was even a possibility when you went in. In that particular scenario, how do you feel, or what do you believe is the best way for individuals to sort of seek out, access to clinical trials?
I would say where you have, and the banging again, guys, I'm so sorry if you hear it. I put my headphones in to minimize it. The same way, oh, you can't see it because that's on my other computer, but let's say I walk into your office and you have the diagram, right, of the colon. Or back in the day when we went to the dentist, they had like the teeth, gives you an idea of what the molar is and, when your front teeth are going to fall out. Or if you go to the pulmonologist, there's a heart. There's all these like tangible, visible items that you use when you're explaining to a person what the heart does and where theirs is going wrong, right? I don't understand why that's just not up in an oncology space. There should be clear instructions about what to do next in survivorship. That's not present. There should be an example of my colon and Diane, here's your cecum. This is what we're taking out and removing. I didn't see that. That's in my, and I'm talking about my oncology suite that I did my treatment in. That was in my oncologist's office, the surgeon, but not present in the place that I would be doing chemotherapy. So I think that that's a place that you could put that information. We're there for like 5 hours, right? Getting this injection that's really killing us, but we need it to live. And I think that people want hope. I think that's a place where you put the hope. Right there where you have to give them the bad news and say, as we move through your pathology and we figure out your staging and next steps, no promises, right? You maybe don't do it at this stage, but you say, there may be a clinical trial you can be a part of. I think it gives hope to people to know that there might be something else. Okay, this standard won't work for you, but we're hopeful that if you enter into this trial, this may be able to help prolong your life, whatever your words are, depending on the person's situation. But I think that's a place where people want to feel like, oh my God, there might be something else if this doesn't work. And I don't feel like that was available for a few people that I did chemotherapy with. I lost maybe 3 of them. And at that time, it was just coming too late for them, but there was still nothing for me to read. There was no discussion about it either, right? I would even appreciate the discussion that says you're not eligible for, right? Because you let people know up front. This trial is for someone who's never been sick, who isn't African American, who whatever all the things you can't be to be in the trial. I think that that's helpful information because right then people, us, we're going to Google it. Oh wait, clinical trial? Why can't what is that all about? And explain it up front. I don't even think there's a conversation that happens most times. And I guess because the patient isn't eligible. But it's harder on the back end to now say for a patient to come to you and say, well, why haven't you told me about clinical trials? I was talking to so-and-so and they told me that they're in a trial. So I think it is helpful to maybe, even if you put up information or you just have a brief conversation about it during that bad news treatment, I would have appreciated something like that. And I didn't have it. I just had to hold on to God, please. I didn't know my staging. I just got my diagnosis. I was told I would have to have emergency surgery and that my staging would be told to me after my pathology went. But they did explain my procedure would be laparoscopic. They would be taking out all of my organs and shaking and baking them. I love Dr. Martz over at Lenox Hill. That's how he described it. And we're going to disinfect them and put them back. And we're going to get that cancer gone, but we must take your appendix and we must take your lymph nodes. And so I said, does this have a chance of spreading? And Diane, we won't know until we go in. Like, what? Okay, if it's past stage, then what happens? I ask these questions where many people are so intimidated, they don't. He said, we'll let you know if there's, anything outside that wall that gets into your lymph nodes, then we'll have to do chemotherapy. He was very, honest with me. And I appreciated that. And then he came back and said, there's a standard care over 6 months, but mine's ran over to 8 because my body just was just beat up, by sessions 6 through 12. I just couldn't do every 2 weeks anymore. I moved to every 3 weeks. And so I do believe that could give hope to anybody.
Yeah. So I know that, the experience that patients have can be overwhelming. It also can be intimidating, coming in and speaking, to a physician and, being their own advocate, and trying to obtain, the best information, and also trying to ensure that, the best medications are being provided. And this can be, despite enrolling onto a clinical trial. The associate director for the Office of Community Outreach and Engagement, Erica Phillips, is championing patient navigators, and providing patient navigators for patients, so that there can be an advocate present at the time, the patient is, being diagnosed, as well as deciding on the treatments that are available. So Diane, maybe you can answer, from, a patient perspective, how helpful would a patient navigator be?
I wish I had a patient navigator. In survivorship, I think when we finish treatment, there's no assistance, at least where I was, right? Because that's not every place. But know that when I got diagnosed, I reached out to Sloan. I reached out to, and yes, I'm blasting names. Yep. I reached out to Columbia Presbyterian. I reached out to NYU for a second opinion. And I was very clear that I was diagnosed with colon cancer. And that was March 7th, right? I probably called on March 8th. And then they were like, well, we can see you in May. We can see you in April. I was like, what? There's like, you give appointments when people say they have cancer? What do you mean? And it was very discouraging. So I ended up staying with my doctor, who's at Lenox Hill and Beth Israel, between both, right? And it was the greatest decision I could have made, but I feel like I was forced to make that decision because no one else would see me. And then how long am I going to wait for this appointment for them to go and say, do what was already recommended? And after I completed treatment, I suffered from all the side effects that no one guided us through, right? I have neuropathy in my feet, so I don't feel toes like normal folks. And I used to have it all the way up to my elbows and all the way up to my calves, but now it's just my toes, and it's pretty safe that that'll be that forever. The cramping, that happens. Still get occasional mouth sores. That happens. I still have, I'm infertile, right? So when we don't think of all the things that chemotherapy snatches from, I was only 44. So no, I have 3 children, and trust me, I don't want no more, okay? But I did not have that option to choose not to have any more children, right? Like after my first chemo session, I never had another menstrual cycle. So I think that it would have been helpful to have someone navigate me through that. That was very traumatic to hear. So I needed a nutritionist, because now how do I eat, right? I don't even know how to eat. No nutritionist. I struggled with 5FU gives you like these sensations in your brain. I don't know how to describe. It's almost like somebody's zapping your head, and it's just like it would just make me do this all the time. My family thought I was losing my senses, but that's what it would make you do, because it's sporadic when it happens, and that's your reaction. It's almost like being electrocuted. So I wanted to see a neurologist, and my person didn't have a neurologist. And I'm thinking, I know I'm not the only person having these side effects. So I was left to find my own nutritionist. I was left to find my own neurologist. I was left to find my own dermatologist. And these are all side effects that you told me might happen. So if you know these things are possible, why not have something in place to help me through it, And I just felt like I was out there on my own. And I spoke to many survivors who feel the same exact way. When they finish treatment, we're just not that important. Now I can't even get my doctor on the phone. Before, he was on call, it was like, yes, let's call Miss Nathaniel back. And once you're done with treatment, unfortunately, it just kind of feels like, no one cares. And that's a very dark place to be after treatment. People think that the process is only hard as you go through the process of chemo. When I tell you it knocks you off your game for years, I'm just gaining weight. I was like 107 pounds, and I'm just gaining, and that's thanks to COVID, being home and having access to my refrigerator, because I assure you at work, I don't eat at all. And I just feel like there has to be more support in that area. So patient navigators are going to be key in helping people not get frustrated and giving up on the treatment too. I believe a loss to follow-up happens too often because there's no gap. There's no support in the gap, right? You can't do it because, of course, you've got many things to do. And then clinics get filled up really quickly. So who could be that gap person? And I think that was an amazing invention. I'm dying to be one. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that input. So we're at the 6:30 mark. So I'll give the microphone back to Kelly.
Yes. Hi, all. Thank you so much for that wonderful conversation and for joining us this evening. Just a couple of closing remarks. So thank you all for your time and attention this evening. I know I learned a lot and hopefully you all did as well. And thank you all for sharing your expertise and answering the questions. So this will conclude our programming. We will send an email with the link to the recording of tonight's session. It'll also be on YouTube for later viewing, and feel free to share with your family and friends. If you have any follow-up questions for our speakers or moderator, you can always send them to me and we'll do our best to get them answered for you. So thank you all again. Thank you to our panelists, moderator, friends and family of Dr. McMenamin for their support and contribution to this programming. That's it for this evening and hope to see you again next year. Take care and be well.
Thank you. Nice meeting everyone. Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you.